This is the essence of it, whether to see the movie, because you're essentially a consumer advocate when you're writing a review. The reason most people read reviews, most people, is to know whether they should spend that money, take that time, because it gets to be pretty expensive to go to the theater these days. Of course, now a lot of movies are on Netflix, blah, blah, blah. So that advice on whether to see the movie shouldn't just be thumbs up or thumbs down. It should be some sort of representation of the experience you're going to have at that movie. But it shouldn't spoil anything. You want the viewer to have the opportunity to experience it as plainly as you did. That's why Bill was saying that I don't want to hear anything about a movie before I see it. The Marvel movies are an exception because, at this point you have to know stuff about them before you go. But like The Irishman, the new Scorsese movie, all of my colleagues were talking about it and I had to shut that out because I wanted to go in with a clean slate. As a reviewer, you're going to do sort of the opposite of that, and you're going to give the reader a chance to sift through the tone of the film. Is it going to be okay for this audience, like parents or guardians are going to say, can I bring my 7-year-old to this movie? You're going to give them a general idea of, is it funny, is it scary, whatever. That's your overall holistic approach. Then you're going to get very detailed with your analysis. But again, in your analysis, you are not allowed to spoil anything. And you're going to reach a button where you give them hopefully a well-written landing point to say, yeah, this is probably worth your money or not. So let's look at that structurally. Very much like a hard news story, you will have a lead. And we'll use the old-timey spelling of lead because we're journalists. They'll follow the lead with, what's the next thing in a hard news story after the lead?
Nut graph.
Nut graph. And we will again use the old-timey journalist spelling of graph. And then you're going to have analysis. Oops, I swear I can spell. And you'll have a button. Okay, so simple enough, right? Let's start with a nut graph. When I teach people how to review, and my kids, by the way, now review, they review for a local website, I say start with a nut graph. In the case of a film, what's the nut graph?
Who stars in it?
Basically, basic information about the film. So that basic information will probably include plot summary. Should mention notable stars. Probably touch on tone. I'd say most nut graphs focus on the plot summary. The plot summary, I like to tell people, should never exceed 3 sentences. You should be able to do it in fewer than 3 sentences. Now, this is all formula, right? Now, a review is, in fact, an opinion piece. And you may vary from this formula. I'm just trying to give you a structure that you can use and then spring off. If you present it in this way, your reader is going to feel led through the story, and they're going to have pretty good ideas about why you feel the way you feel, instead of you just saying, this movie's good. So the plot summary, let's say, 3 max. Okay? So, not Endgame because it's so complex. Can anybody name another movie that most of you have seen?
The Joker.
I'm sorry?
The Joker.
Joker. All right, would you like to take a stab at a 3 or fewer sentence summary of Joker?
Okay, it deals with mental. No.
Well, as sentences.
Okay, I have to summarize what it's about.
Yeah, give me a plot summary in 3 sentences, the basic information that would go in the nut graph. just tell me what Joker's about. I say that I've never seen Joker, which I kind of wish were true.
So it's about his life and like what leads to, I guess, him becoming the Joker.
So it's an origin story.
Yeah, it's like mostly based off of his background.
Okay, so if we're talking about Joker, and we're just telling people what this movie's about, one of those 3 sentences is we say it's an origin story. Okay? It's not, we're coming in halfway through Joker's life. For instance, the first Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man movie is called Homecoming, and it's not an origin story, because we've seen that origin so many times. They wisely said, we don't need to see him bitten by a radioactive spider again. Joker, we've never seen his origin. Well, sort of in the first Burton Batman, they came up with one. But this is a totally different take. So we know it's an origin story, but what else do you need to say about it? It's an origin story. Arthur is a wannabe stand-up comic, right? Let's identify the protagonist, right? Identify the protagonist and his journey.
Do you want to bring the plot up to a certain point?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I say, no spoilers ever.
Yeah.
So you'll give an intro to the plot, right?
Yeah.
If you identify the protagonist in his journey, you say Arthur is a wannabe stand-up comic who is dealing with some mental health issues,
Right.
and the system is failing him. Perhaps from there you say he experiences some traumatizing events that push him toward some dark actions. So, however you want to put that, that is better than what I just said.
So that's like 2 sentences.
Yeah, I'll let,
Okay.
2 sentences, that's it. But except that I would say in that nut graph, when you're talking about Joker's origin, I would say it is different from any Joker origin you've ever seen or read. It's different. Does anybody here know about the Killing Joke? You know about the Killing Joke. Very, very different from the Killing Joke, right? Because the Killing Joke has some understanding of human psychology and how human beings relate to each other, which is why this film is different from the Killing Joke.
What's the name of the film?
The Killing Joke is a graphic novel by a guy named Alan Moore. Brilliantly written investigation of of a good man who goes through so many traumatic events that he eventually, his mind shatters and he starts to see the world in a different way. He
Is that
starts.
the guy who wrote
Watchmen?
Watchmen?
Yes. And V for Vendetta. And I'm sorry? League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Well, yeah. Talk about a film that does not live up to the comic. The point being that this is not that. So when you describe the origin of the Joker being the basis of this film, you have to say that this is an adult, very different take, and that when you talk about the protagonist, he has mental health issues, blah, 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 because all of those things are key to the DNA of the film, right? So that's going to go in your nut graph. Your analysis is based on the notes you took while you're watching the film. When you're watching the film, you were writing down the things that made an impression on you. Presumably the nut graph is something that you could get from the production notes or just watching the film. You remember, oh yeah, this happened, this happened, this happened. But I'm not, in your nut graph, you're not going to, has everybody seen Joker? Okay, who has not seen Joker? Okay, well, you're not going to describe the stuff at the end of the movie that shows his actual transformation into that character. You will lead up to that, but you won't describe that. Everybody understand?
So you consider the spoiler as around the start of the 3rd act, basically? Or something?
Yeah. If you divide films into acts the way that studio people often do, that's not the only way to tell a story. That's the way people in suits think that stories have to be told. Then a good rule of thumb is that your plot summary should never get into the 3rd act. I would prefer not get to the 2nd act. If you can find a way to imply the 2nd act in your summary, that's good, because you want everybody to experience it their own way. Okay, so when you were watching the movie, when you were watching Joker, what are a few things you wrote down? Like, did you talk about the performances? When you were watching Joker, what was one impression you had from it? Mueller. You saw it. So when you watched it, what was a scene or a moment or a line of dialogue or a performance that made you think?
The train incident.
The train incident. Okay, that's a plot element. Did you find that scene? Again, this is your analysis now. This is
Yeah.
not the plot summary. Did you find that scene effective? Not effective? Memorable?
I found it memorable and effective to start the path of the movie.
Key moments, dialogue. Okay, so what's your name?
Gabe.
Gabe. Gabe mentioned, because I'm afraid some of those folks can't hear you. Gabe mentioned a particular scene, which we'll call the train scene. And you found it memorable because?
Because that was the first moment he really snapped. It was.
Oh, you know what? Maybe we don't want to mention that. We can allude to it, but you don't want to get specific about it. So that's a good example. It's, to Gabe, one of the most memorable moments is a scene that we don't want to describe in detail because we want the viewer to not know that's going to happen there. But to say more vaguely, be more elusive about it, to say that that the film contains moments of violence and brutality that shape him. But you guys saw the movie and you have no reaction to the film at all? Nobody here says Joaquin Phoenix was good? Really? Nobody here says, I didn't know Zazie Beetz was with this guy? Nobody? You guys had no response to this film.
Yeah, I saw it. I thought it was very good. I saw it 5 days after it came out because there was a little bit of hesitation with the people.
Threats of violence?
Yeah. And,
Okay, you said very good. Why? What's very good about it?
Well, I don't follow comics that closely on the screen, but I saw that. Well, what triggered me was seeing the Rotten Tomatoes, the critics, and then the really high.
The audience?
So I was kind of curious about it. So
You mean
I
the
went
difference
there.
between the critics and the audience score?
Yeah. And so I thought I was a little curious, so I went there trying to see what the story was all about, basically. I don't follow comics that closely because it kind of like you can't get into it unless you keep going to the screenings.
Okay.
So I just thought it was very good. I thought it was a very good standalone type of movie.
But can you tell me what about it was very good? See, your opinion is super cool, but when you write a review, it's not enough to say, I thought it was good. What was good about it?
Well, the look was very good.
The look, there you go, the visual approach to the film. The cinematography. Good. Let's look at those visuals. Visuals, cinematography. What was good about those visuals? What worked? What was different than what you're used to? Is it the way comic book movies look generally?
Yeah.
The DC ones. It looks like a DC comic. Yeah. So that is valid to say it's the DC look. How would you describe the DC look as opposed to the Marvel look or the Fox look?
Dark.
Grittier.
Dark?
Grittier.
Grittier? Okay. All of these adjectives are specific, especially if you can give examples, specific examples, where it seems dark and gritty, then the person reading the review goes, oh, I know what this movie looks like. Depending on your audience, you might get technical. If you're writing for a general audience publication like the LA Times or Valley Star, you probably don't want to get into things like the use of blue filters is common to DC movies, and the forced grain into the digital image is common with the DC. That's not going to be that helpful to your audience, but to say it carries over the intended dark grittiness of, for instance, Zack Snyder's. Yeah, just like this.
PBS.
Yeah. BVS. Yes. Yeah, correct. Is there anything else you want to add about your positive impression of the film?
Well, I thought I guess it's the director,
Phillips?
the spiraling down to being a troubled person to being basically the same person.
This is important, that you found his journey from being, he starts the film as a troubled guy, he says he's off his meds, right? To becoming a mass murderer. You found that journey to be believable or compelling, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the most important things that you can say about this film, if that's the way you feel about it. So you say, because it's the origin of this very well-known character, you found it effective, I hope you're saying. I'm totally putting words in your mouth. I found it effective because I like the Klan. No, you didn't say that. You found it effective because it was a believable, compelling look at that journey. That's the kind of thing that you need to put in here so that somebody reading your review says, is it just going to be a bunch of violence and brutality with this dark, gritty look? No, there's actually a character journey to follow. Not that I agree, but that's what you would write in your review. You want to give specific examples. You want to say, I'm really surprised that none of you are commenting on Phoenix's performance, whether you liked it or not. Because Phoenix's performance is the film. He's in every scene. It's kind of hard for me to imagine someone having an opinion about the film without having an opinion about his performance. In my case, I thought his performance was really, how can I put this politely for general consumption? It was very bold. He totally went for it. He left it all on the field. So I think his performance deserves a lot of praise. He went full tilt with this character. He lost all out. He lost like 60 pounds or whatever he lost for the role. Although his director said that they didn't want to be specific about his afflictions, which I think is a total cop-out. And one of the reasons why this film is ineffective, because it's not specific about what's exactly wrong with him. But Phoenix, I think, gives a totally dedicated and memorable performance. So I would say that, and you should comment on it as well, whatever you think about it. Now, if you
Have you
can,
seen the last few Jokers? Heath Ledger.
have I seen them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen every Batman movie.
So do you compare that idea to?
You could. This is your analysis, right? This is your opinion piece. So if you think it is valid to bring other movies in the conversation, do it, but justify it. I would say it would be a mistake to say Joker sucks because Heath Ledger was better, period. But to say Joker is not as effective as I had hoped because their conception of the character is not as fascinating as Heath Ledger's conception in Dark Knight. Heath Ledger and Christopher Nolan's realization of that character had roots in the comic book while very boldly making choices that were unique to the film. All of that is true. That it seemed to understand that Joker is someone who sees the world in a unique way, that he finds humor in things that we normally wouldn't find funny, that we would find horrifying. That's one of the things that makes a movie is. This film does not do that. So if you're gonna make that comparison, then explain why you think it's valid to compare the two. Otherwise, I think it's perfectly valid to say this is just a totally different take on Joker. They didn't want to make it anything like Heath Ledger. They didn't want to make it anything like Cesar Romero from the 60s TV show, or Jack Nicholson. Hey, they didn't. They made it their own. My problem with that is that they made it somebody who's not Joker. They just made it crazy guy goes crazy or kills people. They didn't make it crazy guy breaks in a way that makes him see the world in a different way that tells us who Joker is. This is just some dude in clown makeup, in my opinion. That's what I would write. Todd Phillips, when you see this tape, that's what I mean. But you and I can talk about it. Okay. Hopefully when you watch the movie, you're going to take notes on the look, you're going to take notes on whether it's funny or not, or scary, instances of violence that you thought were effective or not effective. But you have to be specific. You really must point to specific things that worked or didn't work. We'll use another example in a minute. But those things are all going to go into your analysis, which is several paragraphs. It's as many paragraphs as you need to get across to the reader why you think what you think about the movie. The nut graph is not really opinion, right? The nut graph is a bunch of facts. The analysis is your opinion. It's how you interpret the things in the movie. Not open to interpretation, all your interpretation, right? You dig. All right. Once you've got those two things, I wind back to the lead. Because now I really know for myself what I think about the movie and what I want you to think about it. Your lead should be one sentence, maybe two sentences. Stretch that out if you need to, depending. Brevity is the soul of wit, especially in a review. You're probably going to get, Bill, maybe 400 words, 500 words in the Valley Star? 500 words in the Valley Star? That is not a lot of space to write your analysis of Joker or really any movie that deserves to be analyzed. So you want one sentence, maybe two, that gives a general thumbs up, thumbs down to your reader, teases your content, teases your analysis, not the nut graph, but your analysis, and is written so charmingly that your reader wants to continue reading. But if your reader doesn't continue reading, then they'll have a general idea as to whether you're saying, yeah, that. Pretty much everyone here has been to Rotten Tomatoes at some point, right? Mm-hmm. At Rotten Tomatoes, as a standard, they take the first line of every review and they throw it in there. For all the reviews that they log, they use your first line, which really doesn't work for a site like Common Sense Media. I used to write for them, wonderful site, but they require that the first line is a content summary, extreme violence, strong language in Joker. So that turns out to be what Rotten Tomatoes says your review says. No, but that has nothing to do with whether the movie's good or bad. It just says, 7-year-old kids can't watch this movie. So your lead should be the thing that they can put on Rotten Tomatoes that lets people know, I liked it or I didn't like it. It's like you could say, this radically different take on Batman's most famous villain, opens up some interesting lines of thought, but ultimately fails, or ultimately falls flat. That might be your lead. But if you like the movie, what might your lead be? What might your one sentence to get people in the article say? Sorry to put you on the spot.
A deep look at the Batman villain, the Joker, which looks at his beginnings and his leading to his problems.
I think that's a really good sentence for your nut graph. I think your lead can be more hooky and more positive or negative. Does anybody have an idea what a lead for a Joker review could be, whether you like it or not? Anybody?
Todd Phillips' Joker is a Scorsese movie without Scorsese and ultimately falls flat.
Hey, did anybody hear that? Well, could you say that louder?
Todd Phillips' Joker is a Scorsese movie without Scorsese and ultimately falls flat.
That's a lead right there. Could you guys hear it? He said Todd Phillips' Joker is a Scorsese movie without the Scorsese and ultimately falls flat. That's a hooky lead, right? I'd want to see why he said that. And hopefully in his analysis he'd explain why. Mm-hmm. Which would be why. Why would he bring up Scorsese? Besides the fact that he was briefly attached as an executive producer.
They take elements from Taxi Driver and King of Comedy to like too much to a point where it ruins the movie. Like Robert De Niro as a talk show host is like just alluding to King of Comedy at points and it's distracting.
I love these guys. These are great things to put in your analysis. These are very good specific references that will make for a very interesting review, and I think maybe he should write that review and run it in the Valley Store. That's interesting. Could you guys hear what he was saying? He talked about specific elements of the film that seem to be references to Scorsese movies. There are strong similarities. And I would say that the film is much more King of Comedy / Taxi Driver than it is Killing Joke, and that's an issue for me. That's good, cogent analysis. He was paying attention when he saw the movie. And I hope that you will write some reviews with that kind of analysis. That's a good way to go.
Michael, can he send that Joker review to you?
Yeah, if you want to write that, then he'll give you my email and you can send it to me. I'll be happy to look at it.
All right.
But that's what you should be looking for, guys. I mean, not every movie is going to earn a Scorsese comparison, but this one, that's certainly relevant. So, got your lead, got your graphing your analysis, and the button is just going to wrap it up. It's going to be one sentence to wrap it up, really to make for a clean ending to a story, and to let readers know you really did mean what you meant, what you wrote.
Did you put in the star rating? Or did you edit?
If you guys use a star rating, definitely put that at the bottom. You're going to say to your editor, this is a so-and-so star movie. You're going to say, if your editor says you use star ratings, you might say 3 out of 5 or whatever to your editor. With your content summary like extreme violence, blah, blah, blah. And your editor might come back and go, you know, I know you said 3 stars, but your review makes it sound more like 4 stars. Do you really mean 3? Maybe 3.5. And then you'll discuss with your editor, and you'll come out with the final star review, and you'll publish. One way to think of button, by the way, think of your lead as opening a line of questioning, and your button giving the final answer to what that line of questioning is. So you have somewhere to land. Land somewhere. So that's a structure. That's a practical way to approach writing reviews, and I think you should start with that. As I say, reviews are opinion pieces, and you're going to have room to play. You don't have to write every review this way. I don't write every review this way. There's some reviews that deserve different treatment. For instance, I once wrote a review about a film called Duck Season that is this very kind of poetic, elliptical, totally pace-based film. It makes you feel like you're into the vacillations of a summer day. These people just like spending their whole day in this apartment, and there's boredom and excitement and all kinds of moments like that. So I wrote the thing in sentences that were short, then got longer, then got longer, then got shorter and shorter and shorter, and in paragraph arrangements, so that just when you looked at it on the page, it would vacillate, and when you read it, it would have that feeling of taking a long breath for a long sentence and then a short. I mean, so you can get creative like that if your editor lets you, but you need to justify it. You're not going to do that for every piece. You're
Do you get private screens, or do you go to a public theater?
I almost always go to advanced screenings because I'm a journalist, so I need to get the information in time to do the interviews or whatever I'm going to do to write the review, and that has to happen before the general screenings.
Have you taken notes in the theater?
It's very hard, and my handwriting stinks. I often can't read my own notes because I'm too dumb to write them cleanly. My son has terrible handwriting, and it's one of those things where I just can't say, do like I do. I have to say, do the opposite of what Dad does. Dad is bad. Be good. Some people have their phones set on very, very low light settings so that they can see, they can light up their page and blah, blah, blah. That always annoys me. It always distracts me and I pick up in my peripheral vision someone else's light. So you have to get used to writing in the dark. And that means you gotta do block letters, make them as neat as you can. And then, here's a very important tip for you. Immediately after the screening, look at your notes and transcribe them. Immediately. Because of just this. Sometimes when I look at that pathetic scrawl that is my handwriting, if I do it immediately after the movie, I go, this is what I meant, and I can write it out in better handwriting or type it, do it on my phone, whatever. But like the next day or 3 days later, I've got no clue. I say, oh, in Joker, he's and that's the best I can get. So that is a very good question. Make sure you write it down, make sure you transcribe immediately. Now, when it comes to the style of writing these reviews, as I keep telling you, this is in fact an opinion piece. So you have a lot of leeway. You have a lot of freedom to express yourself. I'm being a little bit more bare knuckles now with you than I would in a review that I intended to publish. The reasons are, especially when you write, well, in this age, by the way, it doesn't have to be for an outlet as large as Los Angeles Times. Even the Valley Star, if it goes online, filmmakers could read that. And is there really a reason to savagely attack somebody? I'd say the more movies you see, the more you come to understand that the vast majority of movies fall into the great middle. There are very, very few movies that deserve extreme praise or extreme condemnation. I've seen thousands and thousands of movies in my life. Every year I see around 150 movies. I have to for my job. I give each of those movies a star rating. And I do it in an Excel sheet because I'm a terrific nerd. I'm just a super, super nerd. And every year without fail, the vast majority of those movies fall in the middle range. In the range of like 2 to 3.5 stars. If you consider 2.5 the middle, it's like 2 to 3.5 stars. Most movies are in that range. That's just the way it is. So when you see a movie that didn't thrill you, you probably shouldn't write, this is a terrible movie and this director should never make another movie and that writer should never be allowed near a word processor again, and I'm quoting one of my dear colleagues who said that. Great colleague, by the way. So you need to have a little bit more jaded an eye than that. You can't, and I say can't meaning you really shouldn't, pillory in the public square a movie that you didn't think was great. Another way to think of it is this: no matter how bad a movie is, the people who worked on that movie probably did their very best. They're probably people who put everything they had into making that movie as good as they could make it. Some of those people are, this is their dream, and they're trying as hard as they can. So do you need to say, this looks like it was shot by a 2-year-old, and this writer is an idiot? There are probably ways to express that this film is not up to snuff that are not that extreme. So try to keep those impulses in check. I say that to temper those, the impulse towards snark that I think we're all familiar with on the internet. If anybody's on Twitter, I think you're pretty familiar with that impulse, that people are constantly saying, you're an idiot for thinking that. Oh, really? That statement with which you disagree means that I'm an idiot? So I say that to temper that urge, but at the same time, you are a consumer advocate because of the thing we talked about in the beginning. You must apply the highest standards of journalistic ethics to your reviews, just as you must to your opinion pieces, your hard news pieces. You have to be accurate. You have to be truthful, because people are going to read this, and if you're saying, this is the greatest movie, you got to run around and see it, and they spend their money, and then they go, that movie was just mediocre, well, they don't trust you anymore. And if they don't trust you, what have you got? Nothing. If you're a journalist and you erode the public trust in you, you have nothing. So sometimes you have the painful duty to report that a movie stinks. Just don't stomp all over the people who made it. Find ways to express to your reader why they probably don't want to spend the money on this, unless their thing is masochism and they enjoy going to bad movies. If you want to go on a hot date and you don't want to look at the screen, then this is the movie for you. Some of the top critics, like such as Justin Chang, Kenny Turan at the Times, they'll get 800 words or more for a movie that really deserves that space. Because in a newspaper, of course, you're always talking about how much space can we allot to each story, how much space does a film deserve. I think the last 2 movies I reviewed for the Times were very limited releases, and really no good at all, so I couldn't argue for more than 250 words. There were 250 word reviews. And one of them was so bad, it was so awful, but it was obviously a labor of love for this woman who had written it. She wrote the book on which it was based, she wrote the screenplay, she directed it, she starred in it, she produced it, she did some other stuff for it. So, you know, this is a labor of love that is just not watchable. Okay, so anyway, Bill was asking about notes and quotes. To answer that question about number of paragraphs, it's all about your word count and how much you have to say, right? How much you have to say. To finish that thought that we were talking about earlier about how much you write, I always write at length first. I mean, I write the whole thing out as I want it to be. If my word count is 800 words for a profile I'm doing, and my first cut includes all of the quotes I want to use and all of the information I think should be in there, it can be like 3,000 words. In fact, the piece that I just finished about Toy Story 4, the first cut was 3,500 words, and my editor's being very kind to me, giving me 1,000. So I had to take a machete to it, get it down, until I met the word count. So the number of graphs here is just going to be what you can fit that really should be in. Okay, Bill was asking about taking notes and using quotes, and he was doing that because he likes to rhyme. So as we're saying, these things that you notice in the film, those are the things you've got to take notes on. You must do it so that you can be specific and you can use specific examples in your piece. The more specific your piece, the better. It's just unacceptable to write a piece that says, this movie is really good, so you should see it. Or this movie is not as good as Dark Knight. Tell us why. Why specifically? Why wasn't it good? What worked or didn't work? And I would really like to use an example besides Joker, but let's get that in a moment. So you must take these notes. You must. You just have to find a way to do it in the dark. Quotes, I'm all for it. If there's a really memorable line or a line that sums up something about the movie, like a line that sums up the movie's, not Joker's, a movie's inherent misogyny, or a movie's inherent progressive attitude, whatever. If there's a bit of dialogue or a scene that you think expresses where these filmmakers are coming from in your interpretation of the film, put that in there. When you get that dialogue, though, make sure you're exact. Write it down and get it word for word. You can blow great dialogue that way. And don't write down the best jokes in a comedy. Let people have the fun of experiencing the joke. Write down a joke or two. But leave out the ones that people are going to scream when they hear. Let them have fun. I just realized I wrote down a note here about Rotten Tomatoes critics versus audience. Now, I'm not one of those who thinks Rotten Tomatoes is evil. I'm for Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic and all of those, because they're essentially consumer advocate sites, because they give you a very, very general idea of what the critics are saying. And if that matters to you, if you say, am I really going to spend $50 on going out to this movie with my partner and buying popcorn in the parking lot and stuff? Yeah, let's get somebody else's opinion on whether we should see that movie. There are ways to game Rotten Tomatoes, though. Only recently have they introduced the option for people to see what the average rating was, because it can be super deceiving to see that Harry Potter 8 got a 96% positive review. Because if you were to look at each of those reviews to what people actually said about them, they were actually saying, it's not bad. And that's counted as a positive review. So the average rating out of 10 is probably somewhere around 6, which does not mean they're saying it's one of the best films of the year. Yet that percentage is one of the highest percentages of the year. So people will think, oh, Harry Potter 8 is one of the best movies of the year. Really, nobody thought that. When you look at the critics' end of the year lists, their top 10 lists, nobody put Harry Potter 8 in there. And if critics are honest this year, they will put Endgame in their top 10 list, and I don't think they will. Now we're talking about, you mentioned the audience rating, that the audience rating was so much higher than critics' rating. The audience ratings have been extremely gameable. I don't know that Rotten Tomatoes has addressed that issue. I think they're trying to address it. I wrote about it I think I wrote about it for Batman vs. Superman, as a matter of fact, because Batman vs. Superman, because I'm a journalist, I went to an advanced screening before it was ever screened for the public, and I was writing about it, and I saw that it, in its audience rating, the audience rating, not wanting to see it, but whether we like it or not, at that time, the audience rating was like 90%, and it had like 125,000 audience members saying that they loved it when it hadn't screened for the public. So that was obviously game. They obviously had bots saying, I love this movie, I love this movie, I love this movie, and vote for Donald Trump. So I think that they fixed that. I think that they like register distinct IP addresses. I don't know, but you hear about that a lot less. And I think that one thing they did was they changed it from I like the movie to I want to see the movie. And that's fine. They can have a million bots say I want to see the movie. Who cares? But don't tell me you like it if you haven't seen it.
But what about instances like Captain Marvel where there were people saying it wasn't?
Trying to game it the other way. Yeah, there you go again. There are these, flat out racist and sexist movements by people who claim to be DC fans, who went after Black Panther and Captain Marvel, and they proudly declared on Reddit or
I think
4chan or whatever.
something like that.
We're gonna sink the ratings of these movies because, how dare they make a superhero movie with a black lead or a female lead? Yeah, that seemed to work. Those movies really struggled. Those movies made, 1.4 billion for Captain Marvel and nearly 2 billion for Black Panther, and it was nominated for Best Picture. And I think despite all of those trolls working overtime, that the audience rating, I think, for Black Panther is like 93 or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
So, but yeah, they will try that. And I think the initial impact was that it was low on the first day or before the first day. It was like really
Something
low.
like close to that.
Yeah, and then millions and millions of people said, no, we disagree with you. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. I assume you're going to be covering these Star Wars movies.
Rise of Skywalker. I'm probably not going to review that. I would bet Justin Chang will review that. But what were you saying?
No, I was just kind of wondering if you were going to cover it, would you be including all the controversies, all the problems you can have?
Oh, I don't think that those controversies would belong in a review unless they seem to have an impact on the film. And I don't think they will. I think that Rose, whatever her name is going to be in it, and I know that Rey is still the lead. So those trolls saying, how dare you have a female lead in Star Wars and how dare you have an Asian character in Star Wars, I think that they've been pretty much ignored by the filmmakers.
There's been a lot against that Disney's buying seats to pump up the pre-ticket sales or something.
Oh, I haven't seen any verification of that, and I don't think that they need to do that. This film is going to make $1 billion without breaking the sweat. That doesn't mean it's going to be good. That means that it has a huge built-in audience. I mean, when you look at a film that I think is pretty weak, like Solo, and Solo made, 560 million or 600 mil, being an inferior product, even though it had Phoebe Waller-Bridge in it and Donald Glover. They have a very strong built-in audience to see the end of the saga. In fact, I think didn't the final trailer break a bunch of records? Yeah. Yeah. So anticipation's high. If you were able to prove that Disney did that, I think the only way to mention that in a review would be as if you were saying this movie's so bad, you can see why Disney did that. But for me, if I were to do that in a review, I would really, really need that proven. I would have to be sure that that was true and that it were relevant.
So you walk into a film with a preconceived feeling about it, or?
No, I try to walk in with no preconceived notions at all. That's what I was saying earlier. I don't even read the production notes before I go in. Production notes, they'll hand to journalists when they come into a screening so that you have all kinds of information. You want to have all the names right, which is super important. I think Bill's probably drilled that into you. Whenever you do a hard news story, make sure you get every name right. Spell every name right. And you have to do that with a movie as well. You have to spell the names of the characters right. You have to correctly name the jobs that people on the crew had, right? If you're saying the focus puller lost his mind, then be sure you got the right focus puller. It is funny when a focus puller loses his mind and you keep it in the movie. Yeah, you need to be totally accurate, just as you need to be with a hard news story. That is an underrated aspect of film criticism. I can't tell you how many reviews I've read of film and really of theater where the critic just painfully reveals that he or she did not pay close attention and he or she is wrong about plot elements or like the name of a character. Don't be that person. Do we have any time?
Or does your editor choose?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Do you choose your story, or does the editor choose the film that you're going to watch?
Well, the way it works at the LA Times, the editor listens to your pitches because the editor can't come up with all of the ideas herself or himself. Sifts through the pitches and says, I like that one, I don't like that one. Or says, I really want a story on this, so please do that. If you really want to write something that you're not assigned, you can write it and hopefully you'll change your editor's mind, but there's no guarantee it's going to go in the paper. And depending on your contract, you might not be able to take it anywhere else. Hopefully you can maybe one day convince your editor. This story I was talking about, the MCU story, I've been pitching that to my editor for years. I've been saying, these movies deserve to be taken seriously. And I was spurred on this topic because I loved Captain America Winter Soldier. Captain America Winter Soldier, can I get some love for that? Everybody back there's going, this guy's a total nerd. Yeah. So Winter Soldier I thought was great. And some of my colleagues were dissing it. Yeah, it's just a superhero movie. And I was thinking, you're so divorced from the experience of watching a movie that you have to put it in a genre cage. You can't just say, these awesome things happened in this movie, and it talked about these interesting ideas, and the characters jumped out at me. You have to say, oh, well, it's a superhero movie, so it can't be good. I'm sure you guys have run into that point of view about whatever, like music you like. I'm sure that people have said, well, it's a Taylor Swift song, it can't be any good. Listen to Lover. Lover's like a really good song. It's got good lyrics, it's very atmospheric. This is a good song. It happens to be by Taylor Swift. So I've been pitching that to my editor for years, and then she finally let me do it this time because there's a psychologist who's willing to talk with me about Endgame, and then Martin Scorsese said his stuff and it became really relevant. So thank you, Martin Scorsese. I do love your movies. If we have any time, I'd like to try this process with one other movie. Do we have enough time for one other? Okay, what's a movie that most of you have seen?
Goodfellas.
Really? Awesome for you. Who has seen Goodfellas? 3. Really? Come on, guys. You gotta see Goodfellas. Goodfellas may be the greatest mob movie ever made, and I'm counting Godfather. And you want to learn anything about film editing, the great Thelma Schoonmaker edited that movie brilliantly. Okay, so only 3 people. Let's try another one.
Endgame.
Endgame. Yeah, but the thing is, Endgame. Who's seen Endgame? I know you've seen Endgame. Put up. You've seen Endgame. Jeez. How about you? Endgame? Yes, because you have.
No.
Jeez. Do you guys actually go to movies ever? You've seen Endgame. I can tell. I can see in your eyes. No? I don't know if we're going to find one that most of you have seen. Jaws? Jaws? Jaws. Who's seen Jaws? Put up your hands. Come on! Star Wars, the original one, A New Hope. If you're claiming you haven't seen New Hope, then really, are you a Russian spy? You're not really American, right? What's in the Avatar?
Yes.
Avatar. Who's seen Avatar? Well, let's get more than half the class say they've seen Avatar. Like, no, I haven't seen it. No, you haven't seen Avatar? Seriously?
No, I don't really watch a lot of films, but I just watched some classics from between the 1950s to 70s.
There are a lot of great films from the 50s, 70s. I'd say the 70s are where freedom of expression really broke out in American film, and it became one of the greatest eras of American cinema. In the 50s, it was really very rigidly controlled.
Uh,
If you're interested in what we'll call classic films, you might look a little bit before the 50s, like the 40s, and some stuff in the 30s. Anybody see movies from the 50s through the 70s? Okay, let's stick with Avatar, because most of you have seen Avatar, okay? You can pretend you've seen Avatar. There's a black and white version of Avatar with Humphrey Bogart in it. Okay. So you've seen this here movie, you know, this classic film from the 1930s called Avatar. He's just an avatar, see? You can't kill him. He'll just put his brain in another body. Okay. So let's start with what? What's the first thing you're gonna start with in your when you write your review?
Yeah.
The what?
Lead.
No. Nut graph. What's a nut graph for Avatar?
The basic information.
So what's a nut graph for Avatar?
It's been a long time. Let's see.
They're blue. They're blue. So they're blue denizens of a planet? No, a moon. Pandora's a moon. You guys aren't nerds at all. Give me your nerd card. Of a moon. Okay, blue denizens of a moon. But what do we need to know about those blue denizens? Not blue denim, but blue denizens.
They're cat elf.
Yeah, they're, you know, cat elfish things, you know, whatever. But we'll save that detail for later. So they're blue denizens of the moon, but human consciousnesses, right? Which I think is really the key to the film's success. Go into them. And what's the base conflict in the film?
A human trying to fit in with them? A regular person?
Well, that's the protagonist, and you definitely want to mention the protagonist, which I should have put in there. Got to mention the protagonist's protagonist's goal. Has anybody here done any screenwriting or been in screenwriting class? One of the things you're looking for is the protagonist's goal. Why is he or she doing what they're doing? Why are they in this movie? So talk about that, and this is the circumstance he's in, and the conflict. You're usually going to describe the conflict in the plot summary, usually. And the conflict here is that this powerful corporation, with the help of armed forces, wants to strip mine the planet. They want to take resources from the planet. So conflict is, it's really about imperialism. It's about company wants resources, right? There is your nut graph. You'll put that in beautiful, fascinating language that your reader cannot stop reading. Your reader is going to hold on to their tablet and go, I can't stop reading this review. It's brilliant. What will be after the nut graph? And the nut graph will be your analysis. Now, what goes into your analysis? Come on, Avatar watcher person.
I haven't watched that movie. He has.
All right, hiding your face behind your computer. What are some memorable things you would have written in your notes while you were watching Avatar?
The graphics.
The visuals, right? The visuals are super duper important. Why were those visuals important?
Because they're good.
Because they're good? Yeah, visuals are good, yeah, they are good. But it was revolutionary. They had, James Cameron had worked for many years to push photorealistic CG environments much farther forward than we'd ever seen, and he had the real breakthrough in Avatar when you see the incredible visuals in it. The number one breakthrough in it is that he solved the problem of the uncanny valley in performance capture characters. Now, do you guys know what performance capture characters are? You must by now, yeah? What's a performance capture character as opposed to just somebody walking around in a cat suit? looking like Mewtwo, kind of, right?
It's the green screen suit, right, with the ping pong look.
That's the idea. Yeah. Actors will don these suits that are usually green, sometimes blue, with dots for computer reference. The dots are tracked by a special kind of digital camera that lets you know everywhere they're moving. And that has gotten so precise that now the actors' faces have tons of dots on them, so that their computer rendered characters, like the Hulk, will share their facial expressions. They'll like smirk, and the Hulk smirks. But even though that technology got better and better, the characters always had kind of dead eyes, like their eyes never looked real. So James Cameron and his team figured out that they could solve that by mounting a tiny camera right in front of the performer's head to record their eyes the whole time. So those, like the Na'vi, they have essentially the eyes of the actors who are playing them just blown out to be larger and digitally treated to fit what that species is. He solved it, so people looked like they had actual reactive eyes, because he's kind of a smart guy. Okay, so the visuals. Visuals are groundbreaking. They are fantastic, detailed. You might say what they evoke for you personally, right? What do they evoke for you? When you think of the world of Avatar, what do you think of? What's that world?
Breathtaking.
Breathtaking. Yeah, it's a good description. But what else? I've never seen Avatar. Where does it take place? In an alien moon that is a gigantic rainforest. It's an alien rainforest. Because James Cameron is also extremely interested in biodiversity. I've got a good story about that. So you talk about the visuals. Talk about the characters. See if the characters are interesting to you at all. Can anybody say anything about a character in Avatar? Or something that happens in Avatar? No? I don't think it has the most interesting characters in James Cameron. But I think probably the most important element of Avatar to audiences, I think the reason that Avatar caught fire is that it talked about a world in which you could put yourself into another body in this adventure and be part of a cause. And I think that people were really hungry for that. I think that you'd read all of these comments from people about the film where they would say things like, how I wish Pandora were real, how I wish this were possible. So talk about escapist entertainment, right? Films are escapist entertainment where you go and you have this proxy adventure. Most of us aren't going to actually go through space to Pandora and get in a body and fight, fight Stephen Lang. I think most of us would like to fight Stephen Lang. No, Stephen. I'm sure he's a great guy. So that's what a film is like, and Avatar gets you deeper into the experience that you have of watching a film by saying, what if you could actually be in another body and live this other life and be a hero in this other life? So I think that's what, I have a feeling, that's why people looked into it. So you definitely want to talk about that, right? Talk about the detail that you saw that was interesting. Or you could simply say what a lot of people said who didn't like the film. This plot is derivative. I've seen this plot many times. It was in Fern Gully. It was in Dances with Wolves. I'm tired of white savior narratives where, the native people are doing this and a white guy has to come and save them. Yeah, maybe that's your analysis. Maybe your analysis is socio-political. Just back it up. Say, we've seen that a lot. That's Dances with Wolves, and it's all these other movies. I happen to love Dances with Wolves, by the way. For the record, Kevin Costner, the next time we speak, I love Dances with Wolves. So you might acknowledge those things and say, but I liked it anyway, because it's unique. Or you might say, it wasn't unique, because it was just those things. I'm really tired of that, and James Cameron should have come up with a better idea. Let's hope he has better ideas for the next 4 movies that he's working on. The 4 sequels to Avatar that he's working on now.
You're saying it's okay to introduce your political...
Oh, depending on your publication, 100%. Why not? If it's relevant, do it. Do it, yeah. Yeah. look, there's some.
For instance, there was somebody that did a review of Joker from a black perspective. And it was tearing into the story because it's always about white people, and I didn't see that at all.
Why wouldn't that be valid? Why wouldn't that be a valid point of view? Now, look, I do think that there's a problem in going to a movie and saying, let's say going to Joker and saying, why do we always have to see this from a white perspective? And you say, well, Joker has always been white. If you want to do a movie about a black Joker, I guess you can do that, but why wouldn't you just make another more interesting movie, a better movie than Joker with a black character? And by the way, when people talk about James Bond being recast as black or female or gay, by the way, James Bond could be gay, he could be bi, why not? But I always say to that, but that's not who James Bond is. Why not make 008 black or female or gay or Asian or short or whatever, or 006 or 004. You can have all these characters in the Bond universe. In fact, it would be a bonanza for Sony. Are you listening, Sony? Sony should have a movie where they launch like all of these different agents, and they don't have to be James Bond. James Bond is an established character who does certain things. But yeah, if your perspective is, there are what you call schools of criticism, by the way. There's a feminist school of criticism and many others that view art and life and politics through that lens. Yeah, and that is valid in its way, but I think that agenda-driven criticism, remember that, agenda-driven criticism is by nature faulty, because if your criticism is driven by an agenda that is not the agenda of what is the filmmaker trying to show us, but rather, why didn't it be the way I wanted it to be? Why wasn't it the way I wanted it to be? Then you're necessarily narrowing your focus. You're ignoring aspects of the film that might not jive with your narrative. And I don't think that's the most useful kind of criticism, but for certain outlets, that's great. I mean, for certain outlets where people want to read that, great. And I would say if there's a clearly socio-political aspect to a film, or that you can reveal something about it by talking about it that way, do. But I talked before about not being snarky when you write. I think one of the most important things you can do as a critic, besides sharing the experience with the audience, what you expect, is to try to understand where the filmmaker is coming from. You don't know that filmmaker personally. You're probably not going to meet them and have an interview with them before you do this. But don't criticize Endgame because it's not Shakespeare. Don't criticize Joker because it's not a hilarious movie. They're not trying to make that movie. Say, yay, you know, Todd Phillips made Hangover. I want a Joker to be hilarious. Well, go see Hangover again, right? This is what an artist is trying to do. An artist is trying to present this world and tell you a story this way, create a character portrait in this fashion. Maybe you don't like it, but don't tell the artist you should have done it the way I wanted it done. Right? I think that is a rare and valid perspective. I'd say it's perfectly valid to say when I watched whatever Mel Gibson movie, Daddy's Home 2. What?
Daddy's Home 2?
Yeah, with Mel Gibson, and he's like this aging Lothario. I couldn't separate it from Mel Gibson. My personal perspective was this is disgusting. That like he's going after these young girls when we know some of the things he said and done. That's like icky. That was maybe bad casting. And that's perfectly valid because I think some people are going to go to that movie and have the same feeling I did.
You would have mentioned that in your opinion?
Yeah, I'd say it's a little icky to see Mel Gibson doing this unless you're good enough at divorcing the actor from the character. If you're capable of separating the art from the artist to that degree, then it might not have that effect on you. It did on me. But I'm not like that about everything. I happen to really enjoy Woody Allen's films. So I'm a nerd and a hypocrite. Does anybody have any other questions about reviewing? Because we're running out of time. That's it?
Just
All right.
real quick. How long did it take you to write a typical review when you started, and how long does it take now?
Oh, it definitely took me longer before I'd figured out this framework. I'd say that the fastest I've ever had to turn around a review was an hour. Like, I don't remember why, but I had to turn it around an hour after the screening ended. And that's doable, especially if you have this framework in mind, and you just write quickly, you type quickly, and you read it out loud, and make sure that you're turning in clean copy. It's doable, but I would really rather transcribe right away, write down the basic idea of the review right away at length, no matter how long it is, sleep on it, and then the next morning probably have a clearer head and have a different perspective, and have forgiven some things that bothered me first, or figured out some things that really did bother me and I needed to highlight them. I recommend that to everybody. If you could, Bill was talking earlier about not procrastinating. This is one of the main reasons why you don't procrastinate. Not only because if you procrastinate, then you're inevitably going to be rushing at the end and not doing good work. If you get it all out of the way early, if you finish it as quickly as you can finish it, or finish the first draft, then you sleep on it. And the next day you look at it again and you get some new perspective, you're fresh. You can talk with other people about it and keep rewriting and working that piece in the best shape it can be because you've done all of the grunt work first. Can't recommend that strongly enough. It's really helped me in my career. Any other questions?
Thank you.